For the n-Lorem Foundation, N of 1 doesn't mean alone because every patient matters. Hope for nano-rare patients and their families has never been more within reach. Visit n-Lorem.org today to donate and make hope possible.
Join us at the 2024 NanoRare Patient Colloquium, hosted by Biogen, on October 30th through 31st in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At this event, n-Lorem will review the Foundation's progress, present case studies, and host discussion panels with members of the NanoRare community. You'll also have the opportunity to connect with supporters, physicians, advocates, and, of course, patients and their families. We hope to see you there. Visit n-Lorem.org to register today.
Hello and welcome to the n-Lorem podcast. I'm Stan Crook. I'm chairman and CEO of n-Lorem, and I'm your host for the podcast series. The n-Lorem podcast series is the only podcast series focused exclusively on the needs of patients with nanorare mutations. And today we have as our special guest, Paul Compton. Paul is a person I've gotten to know better and better and like more and more over the last few years after I started n-Lorem. So welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you, Stan. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
So Paul just assumed the role of chairman of investment banking at Barclays Bank. And prior to that, he was president of the bank and has a long history in investment banking and finance. Again, it's great to welcome you. And as probably our listeners can tell, you grew up in Australia.
That's right. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Australia. I spent the first 25 years of my life in Australia, and I completed university there. Got a job with Ernst & Young, and really wanted to work abroad. So the opportunity came up to transfer to New York for what was supposed to be a 12-month transfer, and what is it now, nearly sort of 30 plus years later, I'm still here, Stan.
Life has a funny way of treating your plans as what they are, tissue paper, right?
Right, that's right.
And so your degree from Queensland was in finance.
Commerce, yeah. I did a Bachelor of Commerce. I did a Bachelor of Economics. And I also became what is known as a chartered accountant in Australia, which is why I ended up working at Ernst & Young. It's sort of anomalous to CPA in the United States.
Yeah. So was your family a set of merchants, or did you just come by the interest in business activities and finance on your own?
Yeah, no, I really, I was pretty much sort of by myself. My father was a small businessman, an entrepreneur, but the sort of interest in initially commerce and economics, and then the move to investment banking was really a career path that nobody in my family had really done before.
So you start out as a CPA equivalent at one of the major, probably the major accounting firm today, Ernst & Young, and then moved to JP Morgan, much more on the banking side as I read it.
So I worked at JP Morgan, Stan, for nearly 20 years. I started off initially in CFO type roles, but I developed a real love for banking as a profession. And through the course of my career, I sort of moved from sort of accounting roles to then COO roles. And then I ultimately moved into what they call the front office and was sort of directly involved in client activity. And as the chairman of investment banking today, I'm almost 100% focused on clients around the world, which is something that I love to do.
Yeah. So what is it about investment banking? Well, first of all, investment banking is very different, to my mind anyway, from the banking that people tend to think of when they go into their local branch. You might spend a minute talking about that.
Sure. Yeah, so investment banking is sort of really about supporting large wholesale clients, corporations, government agencies, sovereign wealth funds really achieve their objectives and solve their challenges. So we provide advice to those companies around mergers and acquisitions. We raise capital for them. We provide research to them, and we also provide risk management capabilities to them as well. As you know, this is a very large industry. Barclays is the largest non-US investment bank in the world.
Yeah. And so is it just the interactions, it's real capitalism. It's money being used to build. Is that?
Exactly. And look, that's what I think I enjoy most about it, Stan. Firstly, I enjoy working in teams, and it's very much a team sport, investment banking, working in teams to bring great ideas and innovations to clients to help them, as I said before, achieve whatever their objectives are, and to address whatever challenges they may be handling. And so it's very gratifying work in terms of working very closely with clients. At its core, it's all about trust, building trust with clients so that they feel very comfortable with the advice that you give them and the way in which you help them fulfill their potential. So it's really that teamwork and that helping clients win that I love most of all.
Yeah. I think people don't really understand as well as they might the importance of investment banking and just the basics of capitalism to the building of the biotech industry in the U.S., which I'm asked what is the most important innovation in biotech. I always say financing. Without the dollars, biotech wouldn't exist. And so I'm sure it is very rewarding to watch the money you help your clients acquire being used to create value.
That's right. And to grow and to enable them to innovate and do what they do best. Like I sort of really feel like investment banking sort of really provides the fuel that drives the economy. As you rightly point out, that's a very important part of the world we live in.
Yeah. And so you met Andrea. She worked at Ernst & Young too.
She did. Yep, she did. We were both very young. I was 24, 25. She would have been 22. We were both working at Ernst & Young. So we met. This is back in 1990, Stan, in New York City. We came from very, very different backgrounds. I was Australian, obviously, and still had a very broad Australian accent. She spent the majority of her childhood in New Jersey, I think my wife often says, opposites attract, and we've now been married for it'll be 30 years next March.
And it does seem like a wonderful union. And I know you've adopted 2 children. I'm sure folks would be interested to understand how and why that came about.
Sure. Yeah. So Andrea and I have adopted 2 boys. Their names are Taeson and Taeson. They were adopted from Korea, and they are Korean names. Taeson turns 18 in about a week. Taeson is 16. They are not biological brothers, but they are brothers. And so Andrea and I, this is now sort of going back 20 years. When we sort of planned to start a family, we sort of found ourselves ultimately looking at adoption as a way in which to build a family. We chose Korea at that time. It had a very good reputation for running a very robust and a sort of timely program. The health of the children coming through the Korean adoption programs was very, very good. So we made the choice to adopt from Korea. We traveled to Korea to pick up both of our boys, and then Andrea actually then got very, very involved in Korean adoption, and sort of ultimately ended up on the board of Spencer Stewart, which was one of the lead adoption agencies at that time.
I'm sure it was a wonderful step for two boys who otherwise might not have had anything close to the opportunities that your adopted boys have. You and Andrea were among the earliest supporters of n-Lorem. I remember that very, very clearly. And of course, it's related to Taeson, and we'll talk about Taeson. I think at quite a while in this conversation. I'm interested in how the path that led you to the conversations that we had very early in the founding of n-Lorem.
Yeah. So our oldest son, Taeson, Stan, suffers from a disease that goes by the acronym of DRPLA, or full word dentatorubral paralysis atrophy. It is a disease, a neurological disease that really sort of has its origins in you and I have ATN1 genes. We produce a protein called atrophin-1. Tayson's body produces too much atrophin-1, and that has an adverse impact on the neurons in his brain. So he is 18 years old, but he probably has the mental capacity of a 3-year-old. So we became aware that he had this disease back in 2018. We knew he was struggling cognitively way before then, but that was when we became aware he had the disease, because we were told by his biological aunt that his biological mother had the disease, and that's why we had Taeson tested for the gene and the disease. So we then went on a journey to try and determine how did we address this enormous challenge that our son had. And we had many conversations with many people, neurologists, some friends and family who are loosely involved in the medical profession. And a lot of people started to talk to us about Ionis and a gentleman by the name of Stan. So I think it was actually Majid Jaffer, I think, who said to me, you should call Stan Crook. Majid, being the father of a child with a rare disease, I said, you should call Stan Crook, gave me your details, and I reached out to you at that time and was really overwhelmed by what you had achieved at Ionis and what you were at that point embarking on this very bold endeavor around n-Lorem. And based on a lot of the work that Andrea and I had done through to that point, we felt like the work that n-Lorem was undertaking was terrific in terms of helping many, many families address these horrible rare diseases that their children do battle with every day. And so that felt to us, we had created a foundation, Stan, which we called CureDRPLA. Andrea and I had created that very shortly after we learned that Taeson had this disease. And it felt to us that the CureDRPLA Foundation donating funding to n-Lorem felt like one of the many things that we should be doing at that point. And that is how I met you and created what has been a terrific partnership.
Yeah, and it was those early donations that, of course, helped me get the thing started. And I still, pinch myself every day when I think about how much we've accomplished. And not too long ago, I asked you to join the board, and you agreed to do that. And you didn't seem to take much time to think about that. But you're a person who gets many opportunities to be on many, many boards. What was your thinking in deciding to invest your time in n-Lorem board activities?
We became associated with you, Stan, and n-Lorem. And the more that I watched and engaged with you, the more impressed I was by the mission of n-Lorem and the fabulous work you were doing, and there were some very early signs of the wonderful progress that you were going to make. And I felt like, coming out of finance and banking, I had a value proposition that I could deliver to you to help you with n-Lorem. And so, it's felt to me like it was the right thing to do, it was the right time to do it. And I've thoroughly enjoyed stepping onto the board. And since then, you've continued to evolve the board. And I think we now have this wonderful cross-section of sort of finance talent, great people sort of from within the industry, people sort of with government backgrounds. And I think we're sort of building a terrific board that can help drive n-Lorem and its agenda forward for many years to come.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's been great to have you as a supporter, and great to have you as a board member, and to get to know you and Andrea and Taeson. And so I think we should probably now focus on Taeson.
Yeah.
Like most parents of rare disease, nano-rare disease children, it took a while to figure out that there was a problem. And I'm sure the pediatrician said it's within the standard variation, things will get, but you knew, you knew something was wrong.
Yeah. So when we brought him home from Korea, he had a very, very clean bill of health. All the doctors that, as you do with adopted children, did sort of thorough testing of his health, and he got a very, very clean bill of health. He started at kindergarten like a normal child, was progressing very normally through the early years of his schooling. And then it was sort of when he sort of was in primary school that a teacher pulled Andrea and I aside and said that she felt like Taeson was not keeping up with his peer group, and that she was observing behavior that was, for want of a better word, stalling, where his social interaction was not evolving in the way that it should. So at that point, we started doing a lot of work to sort of try and understand what were his challenges, because initially they were pretty de minimis, and they were, like he was, his sort of word scores or what have you weren't where they needed to be. But over time, we saw this gap between him and his peers started to evolve, and so we took him out of what was a wonderful school, Brooklyn Friends, and we put him into another wonderful school called Mary McDowell in Brooklyn, which really addresses children with developmental challenges. And then over time, we sort of continued to observe this widening in the gap of himself to his peers, and we also started to notice that, as a little boy, he was riding a bike, he was swimming, he was running, he could ride a skateboard, he could do all these things, and we started to observe that his ability to do those things was deteriorating, and that his speech was starting to slur. And it was really sort of quite heartbreaking to, and it still is to this day. You look at videos of him swimming down a pool freestyle to sort of where he is today. And so we started to get sort of further and further tests completed. And the initial thinking, Stan, was that it was possible that maybe he had been deprived of oxygen during childbirth. We knew very little about his childbirth. They saw white spots on his brain that they couldn't explain. And then in 2016, a very big event happened, which was we actually took him and his brother back to Korea to sort of see their place of birth and what was supposed to be a family vacation. And I think it was the second day we were there, Taeson had his first grand mal seizure, which was really very shocking. And he was rushed in an ambulance to hospital in Seoul, which was quite an experience given our lack of being able to speak the local language. And we spent sort of a number of days with Taeson in hospital. He had another seizure while he was there. And that was when we really started to believe that there was something very, very bad happening, and we needed to get to the bottom of what it was.
Can you believe it's been 2 years since we started this podcast journey together? We want to hear from you on how to make the Patient Empowerment Program podcast series an even better resource for nano-rare patients. Please consider giving us a few minutes of your time to complete a survey on our podcast. As a thank you, you'll receive a special coupon code to the official n-Lorem Foundation store. You can access this survey by using the link in the description. Your feedback means a lot to us.
Very shortly after that Korean trip, was when we heard from Tayson's biological aunt, that she told us that that his mother indeed had this disease, which of course Andrea and I had never heard of. It was a disease that was most prevalent in the Orient, so Korea, Japan, and up into northern China. And so our first reaction was, let's go to NYU and let's get a geneticist to test him to see whether, in fact, he has this disease. And tragically, that day in 2018, we learned that he did. But I should say that sort of between 2016 and 2018, we had started working with Oren Davinsky at NYU around Tayson's epilepsy, and sort of started to address how do we manage the fact that he was sort of having these grand mal seizures, which initially were sort of, once every 6 months down, and they've evolved to much more rapid incidence now.
Yeah, so you had some of those conversations that every parent is terrified about.
Yeah.
A teacher calls you and tells you your child is not normal.
That's right. Yeah.
And a physician tells you, well, I don't know what's wrong, but your child is losing skills, and you had to watch Taeson lose the abilities that he had, which in many ways I think is worse than having a child that never had them, right?
Yeah.
And then you had the experience of feeling lost and being desperate to try to figure out what the world's going on here.
Yeah.
So Taeson, when I met him, was a much more limited individual than the boy he was a few years earlier. His disease had progressed, and it was progressing.
Yeah.
When just prior to when we started treating him with an ASO, in simple terms, what could he do? And did he have behavioral issues too? Because these are often accompanied a lot of these mutations. And what couldn't he do, I guess?
Yeah. So by the time we were sort of starting the work on the ASO with you, Stan, he was really struggling to walk, and that if the walk involved any sort of distance. So when I say any sort of distance, I mean much longer than the length of a tennis court. He would need to be in a wheelchair. His speech had gone to the point where about the only person who could really understand him was sort of my wife Andrea, and I could in part, but his speech had really deteriorated. He was having, by that stage, seizures about once a month at that point. And he really needed 24/7 attention. The risk of him having a grand mal seizure while he was asleep and smothering in a pillow or whatever, was just too great. So, we needed sort of care around him all the time. He needed to pretty much be spoon-fed. He sort of struggled to be able to feed himself. And, whilst he as a young child had sort of was completely bathroom trained and self-sufficient, all of that started to deteriorate to the point that, he was regularly wetting the bed at night, and that, he had to be sort of accompanied to the bathroom. And so just sort of really basic daily bodily functions were breaking down.
Yeah. And how's he done on treatment? How many doses has he had now?
He's had 3 treatments now. He's having his 4th in August, and Stan, we try to contain our enthusiasm because we're very early on in a 2-year clinical trial, but we are seeing terrific progress. We've got a number of videos of him trying to walk prior to the treatment, and now him walking by sort of merely holding, an adult's arm as he walks. His speech is improving. We're still working on sort of trying to get his seizures down, but we are seeing a progression down by month. And there's an enormous, as you know, Stan, an enormous amount of data that's now being collected through the trial, and we're very much looking forward to some of the first output of that data. And that data is everything from IQ type testing activities to taking spinal fluid when they do a lumbar puncture to give him the dosage. So there's, he wears various wearables to sort of track his stability on his wrist and his ankle. And so all that data is getting accumulated. And so we'll start to see sort of real data very soon around the progress that he's making. But we are, we see great promise, Stan. And as I said, we're trying to be measured in our enthusiasm because we've got a long way to go. The good news is there are 0 impacts or no adverse impacts of the drug, which is great. It's going to go, and it goes. The thing that has been most surprising to understand is that it feels like it goes to work so quickly. You sort of start to see a deterioration in his behavior leading up to a dose, and then he gets a dose, and you see it immediately have an impact. So it's really, really quite remarkable.
Yeah, we see that in a lot of patients, and certainly I've learned that caregivers are the best observers, and most of the caregivers we deal with are also highly aware of placebo effects and try to limit their enthusiasm. Yeah. But their observations typically antedate what we can see looking at hard data, because they're imprecise measures of a complex human being's abilities. But as I look at the videos and everything, I see Taeson improving in multiple domains, which is once again teaching us that what was lost may not be lost forever, which is certainly something I didn't believe before I did n-Lorem.
Yeah, and I think that's the great unknown is what has been lost.
What's his limit? And
that's right. Yeah.
Well, he is a very fortunate child to have been adopted by parents who love and have the means to do all that you've done for him, and we're very happy to be a part of that effort to see him improve. And I'm excited about what we're seeing, and I am. I certainly wouldn't call myself not biased, but I am a pretty harsh observer of science. So we're excited, and it's as I often say, what we get to do and what we get to see and the people we get to know is a great privilege. Really, just a great privilege. It's a wonderful story, and I'm sure we'll share many more episodes of it over the coming years as we learn how much benefit we can provide to Taeson.
Yeah, well, one of the most gratifying parts, I think, Stan, is that now other children, whilst it's a very rare disease, there are tragically other children in the United States who suffer from this disease, and those other children are now lining up behind Taeson, and many are now actively working with n-Lorem on all the necessary steps to do a clinical trial, and that has been very, very rewarding and gratifying.
Yeah, that's one of the other remarkable things about people who have to confront terrible health situations. I first saw it when I took care of cancer patients and was building the first broad anti-cancer program in the industry. And that is, you see people at their best. It brings out their nobility, and they have enough energy and empathy to recognize that it's just not they suffering. There are others who are suffering, and they do what they can to help others in the process. That, for me, is one of the most gratifying things I've seen in my long journey in health.
Yeah, and I think we also know that there is a far greater prevalence in Japan, Korea, China, and so if we continue on the path that we're on, I hope to see the day where we're able to sort of take this drug and roll it out to what could be thousands of people in those locations, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah, you and me, we certainly want to globalize, and it's just a matter of raising sufficient funds that we know we can do it. Yeah. And that's one of the things we'll get done in the coming years, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, it's been delightful to get to know you and Andrea, and appreciate the conversation. I'm sure folks who are listening will understand in very deep personal ways the kind of journey that you and your family have made, and because they're going through it too. So anyway, thank you very much. Anything I should have asked that I didn't ask?
Not at all. No, Stan, look, I'll just finish up by saying, it's been an absolute privilege to have been working with you now for, I think it's nearly 2 years, being on the board, being a donor and a father. It has been, miraculous, I must say, in terms of the progress we've made. And so just a huge thank you to you and your truly outstanding team for everything that they have done for the Compton family. I mean, the one thing I will say, n-Lorem, the people that you have on your team, Stan, are unbelievable, both in terms of scientists, but just as human beings. And it's been a real privilege to work with them.
Thank you so much.
n-Lorem is a nonprofit committed to discovering and providing personalized experimental treatments for free for life to patients with genetic diseases that affect 1 to 30 patients worldwide, referred to by n-Lorem as nano-rare. Many of these patients progress and die without ever achieving a diagnosis. This is where n-Lorem comes in. They do the impossible by providing hope, and for those that they can help, free lifetime treatment. For more information about n-Lorem or today's episode, visit n-Lorem.org. Any questions can be sent into podcast@n-Lorem.org. Search n-Lorem on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook to connect with us. This video is hosted by Dr. Stan Crook and produced with the help of the following professionals. Thank you for watching.